Welcome to Knitting Rhythm, your weekly pause for reflection, rhythm and creativity. Together, let's enrich each stitch and embrace the gentle flow of the seasons in our knitting journey. Hi, and a big welcome to the very beginning of Knitting Rhythm. I'm so delighted to have you here as we start this journey together. Now, this year, here in January in 2025, we are embracing the natural rhythm of knitting. We're stitching with the seasons. And the idea is to align with your personal knitting, your personal journey, and any intentions that you might have for your knitting going forward. We want to find joy with every project, whether you're a seasoned knitter or you're just picking your stitches up again, maybe after a hiatus, or even if you're a brand new knitter and you really want to start fresh and start anew and say, hey, I'm doing this. I'm not going to make knitting something that I have to do every day at a specific time or any major goals in front of me. I'm just going to see how it happens. This podcast is your space to slow down, to reflect and connect with the mindful, creative power of knitting. Today we're starting with the perfect topic for the first week of January, of course. And guess what that might be? Let's set some intentions, shall we? And remember, this isn't about rigid resolutions or long to-do lists or anything that you actually have to do. We're going to explore how we're going to approach knitting over this next year. Thoughtfulness, flexibility, allowing it to bring you comfort and creativity and to bring the rhythm into our lives. So grab your knitting, how about a cuppa, and let's begin. This is the first step to a mindful year of knitting in rhythm with the world around us. Okay, so let's start with why intentions are so important. Intentions aren't about setting strict goals or deadlines. They are gentle guides. They're like signposts. They help us align our knitting with what matters most to us as individuals. It's not saying that's the pattern, that's the trend at the moment, I have to knit it. It's not saying I love that yarn, it's there sitting on the shelf waiting for me. I decide right now I'm going to knit with that in the next 2 weeks. That's the goal. You can say, I would like to, at some point, find a pattern to knit that yarn with. You can still recognise that it's something that you love and it's something that you would like, but it's not putting any pressure on you. These intentions remind us that knitting isn't just about finishing projects. It's about the experience of creating, the joy of each stitch and the comfort that it brings to our lives. Just as an example, you may have noticed, because I certainly have, when I try to knit something out of sync with the season, like, for example, knitting with cotton yarn in the middle of winter, it just doesn't feel quite right. Unless there's a clear purpose, like knitting a baby blanket for a new arrival, it will feel disconnected from the natural flow of the year. And I will have a lot more passion about it if there's some particular reason that I need to knit something, and it will feel all right, but it still won't feel quite in the power of the rhythm. That rhythm is something we instinctively recognise, and when we honour it, our knitting feels more meaningful and aligned. And recognise too, the rhythm isn't always what everyone else is experiencing as well. The rhythm can be very personal too. So we can move beyond that pressure of, because I have this pattern to knit, I have to do 30 rows this evening, or I need to finish this by a certain date. We can focus on the process, on the knitting itself, and let that rhythm in our knitting unfold naturally. So if you do not already have intentions, let's just have a look at the ones maybe that you've already set and consider some gentle questions that you can bring into your reflection this week. What would you like to learn or explore in your knitting this year? So that's a great start. It's a great question. Is there just something that you've kind of been hankering after? A skill that you've always wanted to try, maybe. It could be lace, it could be cables, it could be experimenting with more colours. It could be the smallest thing, like I'm really interested in repeating some patterns that I've done before, because I've not done that in my knitting to this point. I've always knitted a new pattern every time. I'd love to know how easy it might feel to knit something and then knit it again. Sometimes it's the smallest changes that can make the biggest difference. And when you start doing things just a little bit differently, you can start to feel, God, that feels better. It might have felt overwhelming at first, like a new skill or a way that you knit differently, like possibly even saying I'd like to explore how I hold the needles and the yarn differently. It might feel overwhelming at first, but once you try it, you don't realise that you might actually really love it. It's just saying, oh, okay, well, I can have a go. Maybe I should and I will explore it. So is there something you would like to learn or explore in your knitting this year? So this second option to you, this intention might be, what role do you want knitting to play in your daily or weekly life? Are you a daily knitter? Are you someone who knits a few times each week? Is that just how it rolls for you? For me, knitting often becomes an evening ritual. It's a time to slow down and unwind after a busy day. And I will pick it up if I need that slowing down and unwinding at a different point in my day as well. It is like pressing a reset button for my mind. Just like if I'm getting frustrated with my knitting, I know a reset is to get up and have a happy dance, put some music on. Or it's a time to even just go for a very short walk, get some fresh air in me, a little jog around the garden, just a quick sprint. It could be that simple, but you know that knitting can become that ritual for you. What role do you want knitting to play in your daily or weekly life? That's some kind of intention that you might like to set now at the beginning of January, and we will reassess these and come back to them and say, how's it going? And this is something that we can think about further on in this podcast as well. So keep listening. Now, how can you support your well-being and creativity with your knitting? So this is the third thing to look at. Knitting can be like yoga. It can be a way to pause and breathe and connect with yourself. Can you use it as a tool for self-care, to balance other parts of your life? Now, this is a really interesting thing. If you recognise that there's something in your life that feels more pressurised, more stressful, you can find that balance with your knitting and, as I suggest, with yoga and going for a walk. Sometimes knitting can just give you that. I've found that knitting in the garden during spring, and I'm surrounded by the fresh flowers, it's one of the most grounding and creative experiences. It's amazing how much inspiration comes from simply being present with the knitting and the surroundings. Just switching off any noise that's around you. It can really support the well-being and creativity just by knitting. So consider that too. Is it going to be something that just says, hey, give me that balance with the rest of my life? Let me experiment with knitting in different places. How can it support your well-being and creativity with the way that you do it in your life? So those are some reflections that you can think about this week. So let me repeat those for you. What would you like to learn or explore in your knitting this year? What role would you want knitting to play in your daily or weekly life? And how can knitting support your well-being and creativity in the way that you knit and the places and times that you knit as well? So certainly take some time this week to reflect on these questions. Come back and listen to this again if you just want to have another think about it or just spark some ideas. So practically, we can kind of set a bit of a point in our year and I say, actually, this is something that feels right now in January. So let's do it and see how the flow happens, how the rhythm moves as the year goes by. let's start that right here in the first week of January. So the first thing would be, how about a knitting journal? A journal is a wonderful way to capture any reflections you have. You can track your progress. You can write about what you're knitting, how it feels when you're knitting, what you're learning. And one of the wonderful things about a journal is that people have been keeping journals for centuries. Reading a book recently, I was learning about commonplace books, commonplace journals, and there would be people who were wealthy enough to learn how to read and write, who would keep a book. They would write down synopses of plays that they went to. They would put down quotes from books that they enjoyed and felt they wanted to remember. Talk about when they went to visit a friend and what the discussion there was all about. And it wouldn't be, I have to write in it to date at the end of every day and make sure I keep that diary. It would be, when something happens and I want to keep track of it, I will write it in this commonplace journal. Doesn't that sound wonderful? Again, it's the rhythm of when it feels right. It has to be, because I finished knitting, I have to pick it up and write in it. If that works for you, and that feels like a wonderful habit and a wonderful rhythm to you, some kind of ritual, then do that. Pick it up every time you finish knitting. But allow that rhythm to just move with you. You can capture those reflections and track your progress when it feels right, and when you have something to say and when you have something to write through. You can rediscover projects by flipping through old journals. You can see not just what you've created, but the memories that were tied to those moments as well. I know I'm quite unusual because a lot of my journal is in video form. My knitting is out there on video for lots of people to see. And of course, it's also in the notebooks where I write and I make notes about what I'm going to put in the videos. So a lot of my knitting is out there in a very different way. You can do the same thing with a very simple notebook, even with just a few pieces of paper folded together with a simple stitch through them, or as a staple even, paper clip. And it could be that simple. Just keep that with your knitting and it's ready to go. So how about something to keep note, and you can just call it a knitting journal. No pressure, no stress, no you have to do it this way or that. Just what feels right for you. So that's your own rhythm. Make it work for you. Now this week is the first week of the year. So how about picking up a project that feels right for this season? Do you have a work in progress that feels right? Is it a cozy scarf or a soft blanket? Something that's going to bring you comfort and it aligns with this slower pace of winter. It is still winter. It's the second week. Christmas and the New Year might have passed us by. However, with the evenings getting lighter, only very slightly, there is still that cold. We may have gone past the winter solstice and everyone's thinking, oh, we'll be there soon. It will be spring soon. It is still cold. It is still winter. It is still hibernation territory. So just think, what project is going to really set you in place for this time of year? Cozy, comfort, hygge, slower pace of winter. Now, let's also experiment with the knitting rhythm. How about trying to knit at different times of day and see what feels natural? How about saying to yourself, I think I'll pick it up when it feels right. It might be morning, lunchtime, evening. Let that knitting flow into your day, and it can be that source of calm and joy that you weren't really even aware was going to be there. I have noticed that my rhythm changes with the seasons. In the summer, I'm more likely to knit outdoors. In winter, it's about cozying up on the sofa or even in the bed in the evening. I will sit there with the duvet over me in my pyjamas and I will knit in the evening. Why not, eh? Pay attention to how your knitting rhythm evolves and let that guide you. What feels right now here in January? So let's just recap those. That was journal, picking a project that feels right for this time of year, and maybe experimenting with your knitting rhythm. So we really need to move forward as this January begins, and as 2025 begins, and say intentions can evolve. We can stay flexible. Just as the seasons change, your knitting rhythm is going to adapt throughout the year. What feels right in January might feel wrong in spring or summer, and you'll need to shift it and change it and move it, and that's okay. And when we put a habit in place, a new year, say, this is what I'm going to do at this time every day, and do this and do that, we're not staying open and reflecting and really focusing and allowing what is most important at the moment to actually let you evolve and grow throughout the year. So let us do that. Let's just say we're going to stay flexible. These intentions are the seeds, okay? We're planting them now, and we're just going to see how they grow and adapt with the seasons. That's what we do with the plants in the garden. We don't know quite what they're going to look like when you put a seed in the ground, but those intentions are like seeds. Let them plant, set in place, and we can see how we can grow and we can flex with them and adapt with them as the seasons move on. Okay, so your invitation for the week is to take a moment and reflect on any knitting intentions and take that small action, whether that's starting a journal, it might be starting a new project, or simply knitting with that bit of presence and saying, it's January. I accept this new challenge. I want to knit with rhythm. How does it feel right today? And really give yourself the comfort with your knitting this week. Remember, this is a very gentle start to a year-long journey. It isn't just this week, be all and end all. We are here all year. I can't wait to see you next week on January the 10th for the next episode. While you're listening, other knitters are tuning in too. They're all setting intentions and finding their rhythms alongside you. We're a community, and we're connected by that steady rhythm of our needles and the steady rhythm of knitting through the seasons of 2025. Okay, until next Friday, bye for now. Happy knitting. Thank you for joining Knitting Rhythm. May your week be filled with calm, connection, and the steady rhythm of the needles. Until next time, happy knitting.